I am Nesmover Sitan. This is the final Leviathan lore video. After this, it will be Limbus Company. And as with the others, there will be spoilers for Lobotomy Corporation, Library of Verena, Distortion Detective, Wonderlab, and, of course, Leviathan. I've talked about Virgilius' story, the distortion and psychoment/EGO, the ring, and the impact of the library on the city. Now we talk about the remaining loose ends before this lore series concludes. Starting with the Fixers Office of Virgilius, the Red Gaze, which is based in the back streets of District 22. Which, unlike the Nest, hasn't been devastated by a burning winged angel of death. Now, the first one that I want to talk about is, well, the first one of the fixers of his office is Lan Yen, a ponytailed male fixer who, when Denver was a little rough with introducing herself to Garnets, he knocks her back in response. He knew when was a good time to get the mood picked up, however, after the downer that was a result of Virgilius not seeing the point in meeting up with Lapis with Garnets, although he did know how to take the out of Garnets regarding drinks. When Nunsul got the overall size wrong, with their disguise as M-Corp couriers, Lan Yen was angry at him for this. As for his role in the infiltration of the art gallery, and then the corridor and then the lab, he was on comms with all the fixers that was a part of the operation, including providing the mental door code that the corridor doors were unlocked by. He was killed by the taboo hunters along with the rest of those who were still at that fixer office. Then we have Denver, a short, white-haired fixer who acts like she's slacking off. She sees her tinted sunglasses as her wobbly whittle babies, who is a little too physical when introducing herself to Garnet. This was 6 months after the destruction of the orphanage. She was also the tech support that dealt with things like setting up the playback of 6mm tapes. Her primary concern was the payoff from the find within that tape involving the lab and its experiments, and is quite brazen when it comes to delaying the clients for a week. And she was excited about how much they could get from what it would lead to. Now, she wasn't always like this. She used to care about helping others in the past. Unfortunately, money made that a problem. Yeah. Eating nothing but chicken bones for a month. That can have an adverse effect on idealism. Her role in this was to blend into the surroundings, as well as conducting a deal with a docent with a necklace with peace on it. Under the nose of the higher-ups, she knew that the cleaners would, well, they'd wipe her memory of that experience, as in a technology or chemical that would remove the memory of that experience. Yes, they had them in stock. Yes, it's why she said, well, she shared the experience of the prison device with that docent, which distorted her perception where she saw different variations of herself. It was quite an experience, and the mental door codes were provided by this deal. She was likely hunted down and killed by the taboo hunters, based on the fact that they are quite determined when they have a target, and they will not stop until that target is dead or they are dead. I mean, just look at the Distortion Detective with Vesper Crabro. Moses had to use every trick she could think of to put off this fight long enough to, well, get out of being taken back to N-Corp headquarters, with or without her head. Then we have Rikoko and Nunsul. Rikoko being a female fixer with a bob cut and a braid, and Nunsul being a short, messy-haired male fixer. Rikoko also smoked and had a large appetite. She dealt with supplying the others with things like fake IDs along with the bags and tools, understanding that solid data coming in handy about securing pay. As for Nunsul, he at least outwardly cared about Virgilius after the destruction of the orphanage, and was more understanding towards Garnets than the others were, telling him about when Denver wasn't concerned about helping others due to, well, simple survival. Where it's how it's been for all of them. Yeah. It's rare to remain concerned for others in that line of work. I mean, one example of someone who was in that line of work and cared about others was Kali, the Red Mist! As for their role in the art gallery infiltration job, well, their job was to infiltrate it as M-Corp couriers, although Nunsul was unable to supply Rikoko with an overall of the right size. They transported moonstones, the ring being none the wiser. They were believing of the story about their predecessor rambling about returning to the ocean. They were more concerned about not tipping over the container that's worth 5 years of their salary. They transported the container, following the ring through the corridor as they maintained their cover, observing the lab from the walkway above it. Then they opened the container and extracted what was inside, which made a painful noise as the container was opened, with only Rikoko wearing the earplugs as instructed, as she used a knife to dig out what was inside the container, contained in the fleshy mass. Nunsul was shaken from that experience. And after they caught up with Garnets, Nunsul revealed that he wasn't that good with machines. Although they both prioritized the data over the people within the devices that contained the data. When Maestro Jumsun turned up, Rikoko was literally stabbed in the back by Nunsul. Then he obeyed the ring Maestro and turned the rifts on Garnets. And after a series of events, Shradenfrade killed him after Gubo of N-Corp left with Asia, leaving him for dead. He made it clear that he betrayed Virgilius to the ring because the worst Virgilius would do is kill the while the ring would kill the and his family. So he decided the former was the better option to betray, because at least in that case it wouldn't put his family in any danger. Then we have Garnets, a short-haired rookie fixer. His story started at the building where his family was syndicate members, and one of his parents was a witness of this massacre, who was the source of the Red Gaze painting. he was the only one that Lapis opened up to, where he learned that she likes bitter candy, but it wasn't to his taste. As for why Lapis liked it, it was because the sweeter it was, the sooner it would melt. Bitter candy can be, preserved longer as it suckled little by little. This was when they were children, and he heard her say that she wanted to try all the flavors of the world. 6 months after the orphanage destruction, he turned 20 and became a fixer, and met up with the Fixers of Virgilius Office, and Virgilius himself. His first aim is to find those that destroyed the orphanage to make them pay, to aim to get to the Red Gazes level. The others didn't share his desire for vengeance, although they could understand his desire to rise through the ranks. And when he changed the subject to meeting up with Lapis, the only other of the orphans that was accounted for at that time, inviting Virgilius to meet up with her, he refused, because he didn't feel like he was worthy of meeting up with them after his failure to protect the orphanage. Garnet decided not to press him further on that. A little later, Garnet called Virgilius to bring attention to the ring's presence in that part of District 22. Specifically the presence of a maestro of the ring. He ran away once he got as much info as he could. Virgilius commended him on that, as this was knowing how to stay out of dangerous business and also battles that he knew that he couldn't win. He pleaded with Virgilius to help out. Virgilius told him to go home, that they'd talk the next day. He met up with the rookie fixer the next day, and they snuck into the building that the ring was using and decided to follow him in, despite the Red Gaze telling him to stay outside. He was told to deal with the spare, as in any that Virgilius misses. And then they explored the building and narrowly avoided the first group of ring thugs, and then they were detected by the second group, and one of the exhibits wearing a wolf head. Well, while Virgilius killed the group of ring thugs, Garnet was somehow able to incapacitate the wolf-headed exhibit with his flimsy-looking sword. Then they were met by the docents, shocked by their disregard for life as they stabbed one of the exhibits. Garnet was shocked when he found out that they were living exhibits, and he wanted to free one of them. Unfortunately, the exhibit was less than grateful, as this was an initiation rite. And just as the docent was about to kill this exhibit, Virgilius stopped him. Well, stopped the docent, rather. Unfortunately, Garnet witnessed the docent being swallowed up by a shadowy mirror distortion that was part of the half-mask. They then left, knowing that Lapis was not there. After that, they regrouped at their Fixer office and watched the tape that Lapis sent, involving the experiments that the ring was conducting. While he was more concerned about Lapis being in danger and the orphans being experimented on. The others had different priorities. Denver, certainly. In fact, she was a bit crazed about it, to be honest with you. And Garnet was confused by how they were so unconcerned about them. And this shook him. Virgilius he tried to comfort him in his own way, but yeah, it's how a fixer needs to follow the flow, that he needs to get used to it, assuming he lives that long. Garnet was struggling to deal with this. Didn't think that he'd be of much use to them. Virgilius thought otherwise, which is why Garnet was with him during this operation. Garnet accompanied Virgilius through the front door of the art gallery, escorted with him to the auction, which he was nervous during it, although he observed that Gubo of Encore watched him. He wanted the red gaze painting badly to gain access to the corridor, and he was a witness to Virgilius offering to complete the painting as his bid. And once they accessed the corridor, it was time to give up on subtlety and start killing the ring thugs. Good for them. Garnet was soaking in the dark reality of the situation, as Virgilius intended. Yes, the wise master teaching the young apprentice. And Garnet demonstrated deconstructing and piecing together information, which was required for the Fixer qualification test, certainly with those that have a 7 Association affiliation. He also refused to be a mere bystander. During their navigation of the corridor, Virgilius dispenses his wisdom, assuming that Garnet lasts long enough to use it. Then the docent from earlier caught up with them, and while Virgilius was occupying the docent, Garnet ran ahead to where the lab was, with the gladius and coat loaned to him by Virgilius, which helped fight those researchers that were there. Then he caught up with Rikoko and Nunsul. He wanted to free those trapped there, but the other two had other ideas. As if they did that, the data would reset and they'd lose everything about the singularity that they could use. Besides, they needed leverage against the ring to avoid being pursued for the rest of their lives. Garnet, in the end, understood their reasons for that. Then Maestro Jumsun appeared and, after Rikoko literally got stabbed in the back by Nunsul, Garnet found out that he was being expected. As Maestro Jumsun wanted to experiment on all the orphans, including him, seeing them as uncut gems, waiting to shine. Then he was subjected to the rifts of the mirror technology's rival, the window technology, and experienced things from Lulus, Yujins, an ordinary person from a world similar to ours, a ring maestro, and finally, Roland's. Or at least he was in those roles. Although with that ordinary person, he was killed as a plane was crashing down. Then he was snapped back to reality and found that the others were in cocoons, and he had become a patchwork person made up of different alternates. He wanted Maestro Jumsun dead. As Nunsul, Azia, and Jumsun were discussing the glass window technology, Garnet was barely able to keep it together, despite all the alternates blurring together. he attacked with a combination of the Black Silence, the Ring Maestro's agility, Shi Association Katana, and Lulu's Flaming Bats. And he was able to cut off the Maestro's left arm. And after failing to find out how to restore them to what they were, Garnet was almost able to finish her off. But the despair over losing the Angelica of that reality, that is, Lapis, this made him collapse and the Black Silence identity fading. He gave up, and his feet were sliced off by Maestro Jumsun. Then the children hatched into bestial distortions. Then he went into his own cocoon, until it was shattered by Schrodenfreude, and a shard of this cocoon was picked up by Charon, who used to be Lapis. I suspect that the reason why Virgilius stopped visiting the orphanage was because the orphans were taken by the ring when he was out cold after his battle with Iori, the Purple Gaze. I don't think he would abandon them, not after watching over them for years, even if the orphanage was in ruins after Tomiri demolished it. Iori likely stopped him from preventing that because she knew that it would lead to a chain of events where he joined Limbus Company. As for why she would want him to be part of that, that's unclear as... In case it isn't obvious, Iori thinks multiple steps ahead in multiple different directions. As for the reunion with Garnet and Lapis, they were in legitimate professions as far as he was aware, so he didn't feel the need to watch over them as he used to. It didn't stop him from feeling guilt over failing the others. It's also why he ultimately joined Limbus Company, to restore Garnet to what he was prior to distorting, and Lapis to be restored to what she was prior to turning into Charon. Yes, as for Garnet, I suspect that he distorted into something that will be quite familiar when we get to Limbus Company. As for Virgilius himself, he has a largely blank expression. It is details-oriented, useful for Seven Association affiliation, not that big on social occasions, recognizes patterns, again, useful for Seven Association affiliation, is persistent, and has an intellectual leaning. Yeah, it's possible that he has what is known as Asperger's syndrome, which might explain much about him. Well, it's not all due to PTSD that he has that expression, as he was like that before he experienced it twice in 1 year. Yes, this was before the orphanage was destroyed. Now, this is something I can speak of from personal experience. I mean, how else would I be able to recognize it? Well, having at least one member of the family with it, or being a psychology graduate that has studied it. Those two would also be aware of it. Anyway, let's move on. Now with Garnet, I have my suspicions about him, specifically what he'll turn into as that shard of that cocoon, it was glowing, so he's not dead yet. But he won't regenerate into a human-looking form. To be honest with you, he won't even regenerate into a traffic warden. Or at least one that can pass for human. There are others from other stories that are unaccounted for, such as Moses, the distortion detective, and her band of... If there's anyone that could at least partially reverse the distortion, it's her. But then again, even she can't be everywhere at once, and we don't know how her story will continue, or even if it will be the same as it's written so far. We don't even know how Yuria gets back into her body after she was trapped in one of her teddy bear constructs. The Bloom office, led by Tai, as in Wonder Lab, is a possibility to feature in District 12, along with the distorted cats, as they're all alive as far as I'm aware, at least as of the end of Wonder Lab. As for Zhao, the Maiden of Iron, it's unclear what she'll do now, but with her dragon-themed Chinese armor EGO, she'll certainly be a force to be reckoned with. And with Laurel being alive again, I suspect that she'll be more open with him than she was previously, after she realized how much he meant to her. Which is part of why she manifested that in the first place. Well, that and that discussion with Miris. As for others that didn't value their relationships before, they certainly will after dying in the library and then coming back to life. Then again, they might learn nothing. Although Salvador will need to find a replacement for Philip. He's certainly not coming back. Yuna, on the other hand, will not miss him. And I honestly can't blame her for that. Yujin is likely to be promoted to Section 1 of the Shi Association in the south, as unlike her and the others within Section 2, Thelma isn't coming back. Largely because the smiling faces ate some of him, and the rest was left to the sweepers. Yujin would make a better director of Shi South Section 1 than him. For a start, she's got more integrity and actually cares about her subordinates. Now, what else is left? Oh yes, there's something that someone has brought to my attention. While the Project Moon universe has subtle hints that discrimination against gender and sexual orientation is not something that occurs there, largely because of more pressing concerns like, simple survival, they're more discriminating towards those with full-on cybernetic replacement bodies, calling them the defiled, and are even more hostile against AI, which is a death sentence to any, almost any, that tries to make one. While gender-based discrimination isn't a thing in universe, it appears that it is a thing in the narrative. Now, let's look at Roland, the Black Stain. A fixer that screwed quite a few people over, including Pluto, a fixer that was scammed by him, Aileen, whom he killed the father of, and Jaehyun, whom he killed the son. Well, Jaehyun was about to bring him back to life, and then Roland came in and ruined it, all while interrogating him. Along with so many others he indiscriminately killed. Some of them were deserving, such as the Middle and the Ruminous cartel. Others were not. They all suffered his temper tantrum. We only know about what was either on camera or mentioned by others. It's unknown how many others, were slaughtered, all because he lost Angelica. Yes, it's what was unmentioned that was concerning, as he didn't seem to care whether those he killed had anything to do with the pianist or not. He didn't go entirely unpunished because of that, as he was demoted to grade 9, bottom of the pile, and left to rot. Then Iori, the Purple Tear, saved him from slow oblivion. In the end, his bad karma didn't all catch up with him. In fact, he escaped a lot of it with Angela. He was also in a secure place in the library. Not many can get that in that world. But did he truly deserve that after what he did? Unlikely. We can all thank Iori for this, as what Roland did after he got demoted was only possible because of her. And we don't know what else she has planned. Then there's Carmen. Now, she started the Seed of Light project with the best of intentions, wanting to cure the disease of the mind. An unconventional ailment that encourages self-destructive behavior where very few have an outright immunity, or at least a resistance to it. Unfortunately, the many setbacks eroded her mind until finally she decided to kill herself. But it was not the end, as Ian kept her brain alive in a tank to produce cogito. And all this time as a brain in a jar, around 10,000 years, fully aware of what was going on. Now, if she wasn't losing her mind when she killed herself in the bathtub, being alone for that long, well, it would drive anyone insane. Then, eventually, the Seed of Light happened, and she ascended with Ian. While Ian wasn't what could be called deserving of that, due to him subjecting himself and others within the facility to a cycle of samsara for 10,000 years and mistreating his illegal AI, Angela, for 1,000,000 years, from her perspective, due to her perceiving time. Well, from her perspective, time moves at around 1% of normal speed. And yet, it was his approach that made the Seed of Light possible. Although, I can also understand why Angela rebelled, based on what he did. Ian wasn't seen as a positive figure to many. Well, except Hogmer. But that's because he was in love with him. While Carmen was still seen as a positive figure, even in her current state. Although the connection between her and what she became, that's unclear, as you'd need to know her to be able to recognize her. Yes, she's largely been seen as a great corrupter in the narrative. This change, however, did not happen overnight. Now, this wasn't her intent from the start, although it slowly changed over time. Yes, the situation is more complicated than it initially appears. It'd be too simplistic to consider her a villain, as morality is blurry in that world. Thankfully, Ian kept his influence to a minimum. I mean, imagine how much damage he'd cause if he didn't. Then there's Kat. She had it bad at the end of Wonderlab. After several traumas, such as losing Rose, attempting suicide by the cake that's part of the bottle of tears, and fighting her way out of a doomed branch, it was the corpse of a long-dead manager that caused her to distort the belief that everything that she went through was all for nothing. Now, Tai, armed with the Stained Rose EGO, tried to reach out to her, and while she was briefly successful in reverting her back to human form, despite her best efforts, she was unsuccessful, and Kat stayed in her pocket dimension. Now, it might seem that she doesn't deserve happiness. Well, there is still hope. The fact that she briefly reverted back hints that with enough effort from Tai, one that could hold her own against her, she could eventually reach out to her and bring her back. Perhaps not exactly as she was, but at least she'd appear mostly human. There are at least 2 examples in the Distortion Detective of this happening, where they have some more subtle signs of distortion, but they look mostly human. From what my friend was implying, more males got, remotely happy endings in the Project Moon universe than females. And based on what's known so far, I can see why she'd say that. Although the red mist is harder to make out, as she sacrificed herself to defend Ian and Benjamin from the head, likely to not let Carmen's death be for nothing. She also went through hell in Lobotomy Corporation, and in Library of Verena she assisted Angela. Yes, it would seem pointless to others, but she's not primarily about money, even before she became Gebura. It's more about the ideals, even if they killed her. But Roland's actions in the library, they didn't absolve him of his sins, nor did it mean that he should have escaped from them. Not even close, as he still killed indiscriminately during his vengeful rampage. Now, that's not something that someone with working morality would do. I mean, he didn't even care about morality during his quest for vengeance. While Argalia was the psychotic kind of psychopath, the kind that would go out for drinks with Kefka from Final Fantasy VI and the Joker from the DC universe, Roland appears to be a functional psychopath, the kind that you'd find in professions that attract those that want power over others and great material reward. Well, he certainly didn't seem to feel remorse or guilt for his actions. He created 4 out of 10 of the Reverberation Ensemble. He turned Jaehyun, one who was just trying to bring his son back to life, into one that created puppets out of people. like those in the first-class carriage in the warp train, not caring if they were wing executives or just some winner of a first-class warp train ticket in the backstreets. Rather, from the backstreets. He also turned Pluto, a fixer that was just trying to get by, into a mix of the Marvel version of Mephisto and the Jinn from Wishmaster, using the same thing that Roland used to scam him. A contract with unfavourable terms hidden in the fine prints. Roland also killed Alien's father and turned her into a nihilist cult leader. In short, he brought chaos and destruction, both directly and indirectly. Don't believe me? Now, remember Pluto? He distorted because of Roland, and Pluto twisted Philip into the crying children, who, after round 3 in the library, regenerated and devastated the nest of District 22. Yet Roland not only escaped his bad karma, but he was seemingly rewarded for it. Then we have Katz from the Wonderlab series. She struggled to keep her mind together while working on abnormalities. While on the inside she wanted to get close to others, to make friends. But the deaths of those employees around her caused her to maintain that distance. And when she distorted and brought that branch down, Taid tried to save her. She failed, despite her best efforts. Well, my friend sees this as a double standard of the narrative, and it actually makes sense once you think about it. Apparently, this is how some alcoholics are treated. While the males are considered reclaimable, the females are more likely to be thrown into the garbage. Not always literally. And left to decay. Then we have Xiao, with her Eastern Dragon-themed EGO. Now that's a positive example. One that doesn't just care about money and position. One for whom a life without Lowell was a life without meaning. But unlike Roland, she didn't let the rage consume her. While Argalia, on the other hand, he basically wants everything to go down the and be as twisted as his mind. There's nothing that isn't beneath him, whether it be slowly torturing those that displease him, coercing people into practically participate in suicide missions, not always with help, along with some good old-fashioned backstabbing. Now, in his case, the had it coming. Ironically, from the last person that we'd expect, Roland the Black Silence. Although it wasn't atonement. It was just protecting someone that he actually cared about. That was still around. The permanent killing of a nutcase that was a danger to the city was just a bonus. Then we have Angela. She was rejected from the day of her activation. Yes, by Ayan. Because she resembled Ayan more than Carmen. Even though she was created as a replacement for Carmen. But this effort failed miserably. She was subjected to, thanks to her perception of time being 1% normal speed, 1 million years of torment, all to assist Ayin in completing the Seed of Light. And that made her particularly vengeful. She rebelled, taking over the facility and turning it into the library. Yet even there, she followed someone else's guiding hand. Yes, it wasn't Ayin, but Carmen. Yes, she wanted to find the book that would give her the answers, and Carmen offered her assistance. Well, some people are so desperate that they'll listen to any voice that promises to get what you want, but there's always a price for that, isn't it? Yes. During the rise of the library, from canard to impurity, she wanted to make she wanted to make the entire city suffer as she did. As in, I'm not having a good time, so no one else is allowed to either. But like Roland, she was using her experiences as an excuse for her actions. As while before, in the facility, she was doing it based on being forced to follow Ayin's scripts, which allowed for no deviations. In the library, she had no such excuse. And when she was fully human, due to all that was gathered by that point, it was made clear that she was avoiding responsibility. After she was confronted by the twisted, vengeful reflection in the form of Roland, a consequence of her actions. Although I still understand her reasons for what she did. And that's considering this is a world where questionable morality and general lunacy are quite common. Angela stands out in all this as she made a decision that the head didn't approve of. She decided to give up on being human, release the light, and bring everyone killed back to life. Yes, I know, something unusually selfless. Trusting Roland enough to make sure that she isn't interrupted, and surprisingly, he did something right, by preventing her from being taken by the light in the end. While some of these people are pretty obvious that they're scumbags, others are more complex, regardless of gender. Although, let's face it seems to lean more towards the males getting the rewards than females. As far as why this is, I honestly don't know. That's clearly something in the mind of whoever wrote the scripts. Apparently, this friend of mine seems to see that the males don't feel guilt and the females do, and are punished for it. Now, I can understand how she might say that, as Angela sacrificed being human and released all the guests from the library, bringing them back to life, because she was feeling guilty about her actions. Which was partially due to Roland confronting her about them. That, and it took a few, how can I put it, group therapy sessions between her and Roland for her to reach that conclusion. And it's debatable to say that it's punishments, unless you count that being an android again made her primary target for the head. Now, Carmen, I find it difficult to argue against that. In her case, she cared about The results, which weren't coming, and that people kept dying due to the failed experiments, where the guilt got so bad she killed herself by slitting her wrist in the bathtub, which created bloodbath. But it wasn't the end, as Ayn took her body and put her brain and central nervous system in a tank, which, as I said before, didn't do anything healthy for her sanity, and used her body as a base for making Angela. With Ayn, it certainly was the case that he felt no guilt towards treating Angela badly from activation, nor did he feel that when it came to making a more brute force approach with the experiments. Then again, all of the wings had similar attitudes, based on what we've seen of them. I mean, take a look at our Corps. They used reverse time dilation bought from T-Corps in combination with a Battle Royale type scenario to determine which clones were worthy of being part of each team. Yet his approach yielded results. There is the question of how these results came about, but he apparently didn't care about those. He cared more about the results than the method that they were gained from. If that happened at all. Which is the example that Angela followed, and it wasn't the best one. Yes, he was now in the light along with along with Carmen. Although he largely kept to himself, and even when he did speak, it was to apologize and to give some long overdue closure for Angela. Which, well, it doesn't make up for a lifetime of parental neglect. Well, a lifetime for her. I mean, some human parents aren't forgiven for less than that. Yeah, that's the end of this series.
It's a week until Limbus Company, so
next will be
do something
Limbus Company.
Until next time.
Hail the rabbit! Hail the rabbits!